Smoked, boiled, baked, or roasted, oysters are big business in the South Carolina Lowcountry.
Charleston is an area where we consume a tremendous amount of oysters. Throughout the year, especially during the colder months, you'll see oyster roasts all over the Lowcountry.
They also leave behind a lot of big clunky shells.
Here at Fleet Landing, we go through between 8 and 10 bushels of oysters each week, and that creates a tremendous amount of shells.
Not to mention a lot of waste, unless you return them to the sea where new oysters will be more than happy to have them.
We can have something firm to put back in the water so that the baby oysters can land on, because if they land in the mud, they will suffocate and die.
And this is biomass that you're not going to have out there unless you put it out.
Back when Charleston had canneries, replanting oyster shells along the coastline was a fact of life.
Even the big producers in the 30s, the canneries, they knew, they put out millions of bushels a year. They knew exactly what they had to do to have oysters the next year. They had to plant. They had big barges, they had tugboats, they had 3 and 4 crews on each operation. And of course, shell was hard to come by. There was a few shucking houses. By the middle 1980s, most of the shucking houses had shut down. There was, in the heyday of the canneries back in the 30s, there were millions of bushels of oyster shell around just from the canneries. The last cannery shut down in 1986, and so we had no source of shell.
In the late 1990s, the Department of Natural Resources started its own replanting program. This summer, they stepped up the process by bringing in new partners and local restaurants.
We got involved, we were approached by Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, and the Nature Conservancy in July. DNR, Department of Natural Resources, has been offering the shell collection for many, many years from restaurants, and we're trying to take the service to another level where we offer curbside 6-day-a-week service to collect oyster shells and shells from restaurants and bring them back and re-nourish our own beds.
For us as a restaurant, the oyster recycling program is very simple. It merely requires us to separate our used oyster shells and keep them in a container and ready them for pickup on a weekly basis.
These are the 32-gallon containers that we supply to all the restaurants. They're allowed to do a mixed shell. The cans are brought back outside to the trailer where they're loaded up and dumped into our vehicle.
From there, it's off to a foul-smelling quarantine site on Johnson Island.
We have about 10,000 bushels right here. That's about 500,000 pounds of shell. We bring them to one of these 3 spots where we quarantine them for up to 6 months at a time. We want to get rid of any invasive species that we might introduce into the waters, and also any diseases that these oysters might have on them that will kill them off before we enter them in the waters. And from here we take them and distribute them all up and down the whole state coastline and create artificial oyster reefs with them. And we load them on our barge and use a high-powered water cannon to actually blow them off the side of the barge onto the marsh.
Over the next few years, these shells will be home to little bivalve mollusks that will someday taste great with a little melted butter and a beer. In the meantime, they will play a key role in the environment.
They're called ecosystem builders, actually, and they're very equivalent to what you would think of as a coral reef out in the ocean. They have their own habitat around them, they have their own system that's and their own substrate that is providing for future generations of those species.
Oyster beds are about more than just oysters.
Also, the oyster beds are habitat for over 130 different species in South Carolina, and those species are things that we also eat and depend on, things like blue crab and shrimp and a bunch of different finfish, redfish, summer flounder, we'll visit them. Also, oyster reefs do help to buffer shoreline erosion. So as the reefs deplenish, we may see some more erosion in some areas where those reefs are no longer in existence. Also, the oysters will filter the water, so an adult oyster can filter 50 gallons of water a day, And so we'll probably see some declining water quality in areas where we're seeing some of these significant oyster losses.
In the first year of the program, some 515 bushels were recycled.
Now we're up to 17,000, 18,000 bushels a year. And that's only going to go up this year especially. We've had so much publicity, and the big green movement is really kicking in with this oyster shell recycling.
It's not a difficult sell at all. The restaurants really want to do it and they want to participate. It's a great environmental step for most of them to be involved with.
I think it's a business responsibility for other restaurants to join in these practices, to give back a little bit because we take so much from the oceans.